How are you doing, Doctor? It's good to have you back on the eighth episode of our 21 SGS podcast.
Good morning, Nidishana. Good to be back on the 21 SGS podcast series.
Yes. So one of the topics that I'm quite keen to discuss in our today's session is that it's a very, very important topic, even on the year 2024 Global Risk Report by World Economic Forum have greatly highlighted. One of the key risk factors is the geopolitical disruption. And also the geopolitical disruption is also led to so many climate-related challenges and issues. As we speak, on the ESG perspective, there are 434 million children are in dispersed. They don't have a proper home to live. They don't have clean water to drink. They don't have proper food to eat. So these factors have already come to light. These are not just predictions, has come to light now. Even as we speak on this podcast, that what is really happening in California on the fire which is taking place and destroying hundreds of thousands of acres of land and valuable property, and putting 35,000 odd people homes under disbursement. So this is what we are mainly talking about. So I'd like to really hear from you, Doctor. Uh, on the geopolitical disruption, what are the impacts that geopolitical frameworks, which is currently in pursuit, is going to affect in the next couple of years in terms of climate change in particular?
Thanks, Dishana. But let me start with the topic that you alluded to, which is extreme weather incidents. As reported in the World Economic Forum, one of the things that we need to be very, very watchful about extreme weather incidents is that extreme weather doesn't worry whether you're a billionaire, millionaire, or a pauper. It hits everyone equally. And as I was watching the news on CNN in terms of how the California fires, Los Angeles fires, are basically destroying wealth, it's unbelievable that the rich and famous are beginning to lose all their wonderful properties in Los Angeles. So the bottom line is, it was not so long ago we heard the same kind of fires happening in Australia. So extreme weather is now a part and parcel of what we will live with. And the only solution to that is to exit fossil fuels. If we keep burning fossil fuels, the planet gets warmer. And 2024 was recorded as the hottest year the planet has ever recorded. And all the research is showing that every year from now will be a world record in terms of heat and in terms of global warming. Having said that, let me move on to our topic today, which is geopolitical disruption. Now, the subject of geopolitical disruption and geopolitics is yet not fully mainstreamed in most of the business school MBA programs, for that matter, even in executive education. But if we have leaders in business and nations who ignore geopolitics, I think that will be an extremely backward-looking idea, because the world needs to now pay absolute respect and understand what is happening in terms of the geopolitical scenarios of the world. So today we will spend some time understanding what is happening with the following key topics. We will look at the US and the European Union and their global influence since World War II, 1948 to now. We'll also understand how they have set up organizations which have supported and advanced their thinking in terms of the World Bank, IMF, and to a certain extent, even the United Nations. We will then spend some time understanding what is happening with BRICS, the new organization that is being championed by Russia, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa. We will also dovetail that to understanding what is happening with the China One Belt, One Road initiative and the European Union's answer to that, which is the EU Green Deal and Gateway Initiative. So these are the key base topics for today. And let's basically start by understanding the reality on the ground of what is happening in terms of geopolitical disruptions all over the world. Uh, you're very familiar with what is happening with Europe, with since the Russian intervention into Ukraine. This conflict has now uh, reached a head, and you can see that people are being lost on both sides. And this has also led to the Russians now bringing North Koreans into the battlefield to fight on their behalf. The second big conflict area is the Middle East, where we can see the Israeli forces have virtually taken over Gaza, and Lebanon is under threat, and over 40 to 50,000 people have died, of which the majority are children, unfortunately. We also see another point of tension between China and Taiwan, and we can see how this is also an issue that could drag countries like the United States into the forefront of this issue. We are also seeing the advent of a new leader in the United States, who, by the way, announced in the last 2 days that he was wanting to buy Greenland, and also wanted the Panama Canal to be returned to the USA. Now, these are unheard of statements that we are now beginning to hear of. Global debt continues to boom and is nearly 3 times the global GDP. And other issues that could have an impact on this is global trade sanctions, trade wars, which are also being talked about. US has already talked about increasing tariffs by about 60%. And there's also another area of potential conflict, which is the whole conflict over water resources, because as you know, water is a limited resource. So nations who control water will have great influence. So with all these issues up in the air, one of the I would say the most pressing topic that we need to be constantly thinking about is how will this distract governments and leaders from actually addressing the climate emergency? Because for me, every one of the issues I have mentioned so far is a distraction from addressing the existential threat every country in the world faces, as recorded in the Global Risk Report, which is extreme weather incidents. So if we don't address that and get sidetracked by all these other issues, then that issue becomes a much bigger issue than it is today. So let's get to the geopolitics side. Interesting definition of geopolitics. I just want to share with you a few definitions which I've come across. Geopolitics is defined as the way a country's size, position, etc., influences its power and its relationships with other countries. That's from the Cambridge University Dictionary. Another definition is geopolitics is the study of the effects of the Earth's geography, human and physical, on politics and international relations. While geopolitics usually refers to countries and relationships between them, it may also focus on two other kinds of states: de facto independent states with limited international recognition, and relations between subnational geopolitical entities such as federal states that make up federation confederation or a quasi-federal system. So the last key definition I want to share with you is at the level of international relations, geopolitics is a method of studying foreign policy to understand, explain, and predict international political behavior through geographical variables. These include area studies, climate studies, topography, demography, natural resources, and applied sciences. Okay, having positioned the subject of geopolitics, why is it absolutely essential for 21st century leaders to be well steeped in this subject? Because if you are a company that is multinational, international, or transnational, the global politic determines the access your company has to global markets. It could be tariffs that are detrimental. It could be simple sanctions that are detrimental. And these are happening right in front of our eyes as we speak. And one of the issues that geopolitics somehow is also looking at is how the global debt has now crossed 300 trillion in a global economy of only 105 trillion. So three times we are using resources which are three times the global politic, global GDP. And if one looks at national debt in countries have now crossed 100 trillion. So the rest of it is the other debts that the countries have. And USA continues to be the country with the highest debt of about 34 to 36 trillion dollars in a GDP of about 25. So basically the American debt of $34.4 trillion is being held by uh, various nations and various organizations. And China is also one of the key holders of this debt. And we can see that global debt can also become a bargaining chip for countries who want to expand into other nations. And China has quite a few countries indebted to them at the moment. And because China also has the cash reserves to move into these issues. The second topic I want to look at after debt is water. And the Economics magazine actually had a extremely detailed issue covering water wars between 3000 BC and 2019 AD. And it's amazing how many global conflicts have happened simply because of water. And water is going to be an issue of geopolitical influence because we can see that the global review of water by 2040 shows us that a majority of nations in the southern hemisphere, which includes the Middle East, India, China, even the USA and South Africa and Australia, are projected to have extremely high water stress by the year 2040. So water will also become a major issue going forward. Let's now spend a little time on understanding what is happening with the BRICS organization. Now, the BRICS organization is basically a strategy that has been put together by the Chinese and Russians. And basically what they have said is that they would like to have a greater autonomy and say in how the world is run. And in other words, what they're basically pushing back is the kind of control and leadership the West has had in terms of the USA and European Union in terms of all global matters. So with the advent of BRICS, we are going to now begin to see a shift of power from the global West to the global East. And the countries there are already 16 countries which have applied for BRICS membership. This includes the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Iran. So the BRICS nation has talked of de-dollarization for all trade between BRICS, inter-BRICS trade. And they have also looked at basically uh, using their nation's currency for all trade in the world. And this is very important to look at because China, if one looks at China's industrial output at about 11.26 trillion, is larger than the combined industrial output of Canada, Brazil, Germany, Japan, India, and the United States. So the country with the greatest industrial output is China. And if China de-dollarizes, then all these, the trade they're doing and industrial output will be de-dollarized. So what is the situation with BRICS as we speak today? As at today, if we look at 2023, end of 2020, by end of 2023, BRICS accounted for 32.1% of global GDP versus in terms of GDP based on purchasing power parity versus 29.9% of the G7 nations. And this figure is set to increase. And with the increasing number of members moving towards BRICS, we are going to see a greater control and impact of BRICS nations on global trade. And this is something that we need to be now wary of. And also, we need to understand the impacts of a very strong BRICS in the future. The BRICS nations have also committed to doing two other things. One is to set up their own currency. Now, this is being debated at the moment. There's a lot of, some the BRICS nations don't want to do that. Some BRICS nations are adamant to do that. And second one is the BRICS have also now set up a BRICS bank. So the first big geopolitical move that is happening in the world that we need to be cognizant about, and business leaders need to be cognizant about, is the advent of BRICS and how BRICS is going to change the global trading norms and going to basically look at trading between BRICS nations with country currencies as opposed to the US dollar led trading. So this is going to now obviously have an impact in terms of how the US perceives BRICS nations. And the incoming president to the United States has already talked about very heavy sanctions and controls on nations who move towards de-dollarization. Now, the question is, are these threats to be taken seriously or are they to be ignored? I would say no threat can be ignored anymore. We have a US leadership that is beginning to see the American influence in terms of global trade being impacted. And at this point in time, it is difficult to see how this will get played out. But the bottom line for all business leaders and national leaders is that when one takes decisions in terms of strategic decisions like where should we place our manufacturing, how should we deal with trade, what currency should we be dealing it with, the advent of BRICS has to be taken into account in every one of those decisions. Now, interestingly, we can see the European Union also moving in that direction of increasing tariffs for ex-China goods. But the Chinese have also been quite smart in that the automobile companies like BYD have basically 16 plants already in Europe, and they are building the 17th one in Turkey, which is going to overcome some of these controls and tariff challenges. But the bottom line is the European Union has also launched their own initiative, and that was called the European Green Deal, which insists on uh, closer to market trading as opposed to importing from countries far and wide. And we can also see the European gateway strategy going to play out in this whole equation. But the key strategy that is already having great impact in terms of global trade is what I would like to call the China One Belt, One Road strategy. And as we speak, China today has an influence over nearly 140 to 150 countries in the world with its One Belt, One Road initiative, with its expansion plans. So as at now, we have a Belt and Road initiative, which has basically given China a humongous advantage over most other nations, because what they have done quite effectively is looked at countries that need infrastructure and invested in infrastructure. And in return for investing in infrastructure, they have been able to secure some of the most important resources, natural resources these countries have. So if one wants to look at Africa as a case in point, you can see that today the Chinese have secured uh, a majority of the key resources in Africa, North and South Africa, from from lithium to manganese to nickel to platinum, silver, titanium, uranium. You can see that the China One Belt, One Road has already secured most of those resources in Africa, which is the most resource-rich country in the planet. And one has to bear in mind that just as much as China is doing the One Belt, One Road strategy, China today is a global leader in almost 5 to 6 of tomorrow's industries, from solar power to wind power to electric rail to electric vehicles to electric batteries, storage batteries. China is already the world's leader in terms of this whole influence. So the the real question for all of us as we look at BRICS, we look at China One Belt, One Road, we look at the European Green Deal, and we also look at the alliance between the European Union and USA. How all of this is going to get played out in the 21st century is anyone's guess, because I don't think we can pick a winner at this point in time because it's early days. But I just want to share with you two interesting quotes that I came across in terms of the attitude of the US and the attitude of the Chinese in terms of everything that's happening. So, US Ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, in February 2024 said, "We don't want to live in a world where the Chinese are the dominant country." Now, the question is, the quote sort of is significant because that is an attitude that is being portrayed at the very high level in the US. But now contrast this with what the Chinese ambassador to the US had to say, Xi Feng, in January 2024. And he says, the earth is big enough for China and the US to develop respectively and prosper together. So completely two different attitudes to what is happening in the world today. I think the reality is something that is in between those two extremes, and one has to accept the fact that any company wanting to do business in the the new BRICS nation, once it's unified, will probably have to also, uh, do this extremely tactfully, because they could have tariffs and sanctions coming their way if they don't anticipate them at the very beginning and understand how the European Union and the US might play out when this happens. So basically, I think governments need to study the advent of BRICS very carefully and find ways to coexist between the BRICS nations and the US and EU. I would say governments need to do this urgently to have what I would like to broadly call a non aligned strategy, so that they can benefit from both the US, EU, and BRICS equally, as opposed to letting any one of them override the other. I think they need to also recognize the US dollar influence that the world has today, and that they need to understand that there will be a decline of that over time, and also pay heed to the rising influence of China in the global geopolitics. So, what does that mean to businesses? Number one, businesses once again must basically have manufacturing facilities and access to raw materials in BRICS nations as well as the US and EU. Because the new world order might determine that, especially when you look at the European Green Deal, they want countries to have manufacturing in the European Union. They are not too happy with having to import goods from far and wide, because that contributes to the entire carbon emission story. Lastly, but not least, when one looks at the impact of all of this on families, I think at a family unit level, it must keep a very open mind and not start, creating unnecessary tension between the two entities that are now beginning to have impact in the world today. The the world of a new 21st century, where the BRICS organization and nations and the US, EU, where ideally coexist, is our hope. But it is unlikely to be that. And I think increasingly, nation after nation will have to basically align itself with organizations like the BRICS and the US, EU, and hopefully they will have a non-aligned strategy, because if they do align too much to any one of them, I can see their trade tariffs and sanctions begin to come into play. So the geopolitical scenario we are looking at is influenced, of course, by what is happening with the climate emergency and the climate change, because most nations will have a significant impact on their global GDPs due to extreme weather incidents. So the real question is, which nations are more vulnerable to the climate emergency of the two entities? And I would say that when one looks at what is happening in the world today, both the BRICS nations and the USEU, every one of these nations are beginning to have massive impact in terms of climate emergency. So they will be impacted almost equally, as we discussed at the beginning of this session. So that's a quick overview, Dishana, of the geopolitical landscape and the geopolitical maneuvers that are happening in the world today. The bottom line is that today we cannot have a business leader not knowing what is happening with these two organizations. Over to you for any special question.
Yes, Doctor. I think it was quite a comprehensive elaboration, and thank you for that. There is a popular saying that there is enough resources around the world for everyone to live happily and with harmony, but not for one man's greed.
Correct.
So one of the things that I start to see among nations, among individuals, is for the need to have more. So most organizations are not being recognized and driven uh, not by the good work that they do, but also how much they sell, how much profitability they make over the last year. That always being the key driver, the key motivation. But at what cost? What are the things that you're trying to achieve? If you take nations wise, they want to grow every year as a nation. These are all good motivations and attitudes to have, but sometimes they try to do it at all costs. That's where all these conflicts are taking place. Now, if you take natural resources around us, you highlight a very key important point which captured my attention is the clean water. If you really think about the entire planet is 70% is around water, but it's not consumable. But clean drinking water for sanitization and for our own personal use, uh, all that for farming and everything, that availability of water is very limited. It's just only about 8%.
3%.
So exactly, and then also it's getting polluted. While people are not really realizing it, that because still I believe some parts of the world people have come to impact this, especially in certain non-developing or other developing countries, in certain rural parts of those respective countries. They don't have simple drinking water, clean water,
Correct.
and they don't have resources to even to purify whatever the available water they have. So these things are going to become more and more challenging as we see these conflicts, because people will have, even on the Global Risk Report 2024 by the Economic Forum, highlighted that water is one of the highest uh, conflicts can take place in the future,
Oh,
because
absolutely.
of because it will come to a point that people are fighting against these high value greeds, and also people are trying to understand what are the things that they need, but end of the day their needs are never being met because of greed. So therefore they will start to create more conflicts. There will be um, a scarcity of high quality resources because it never ends. Now, other point which you also highlighted on the geopolitical perspective, if you take China, the secret sauce for China is in terms of their manufacturing capability. Whatever they produce at a very low cost because they bring efficiency, they bring new technology. So we take, for an example, automobile industry. If you compare with the West, and even in comparing with the West and China, China produces a similar high quality automobile at a 23%, 30% less in cost. So that's
Correct.
why it is, but of course, there is benefits for the consumer, but some nations don't want to even give that benefit because their incompetencies are reflected. So they are just putting high tariffs in
Tariffs.
order to, yeah. But I think the way I would say is that this is a very complicated matter, very difficult to resolve, but only thing is that what people can do is that their own individual way, try to understand, to become more and more vigilant and play your part in this journey, like in terms of consumption, because sometimes we consume things without thinking its consequences. So that's one of the key things that as an individual can do, because it's a collective of a large group of people. So I believe in the next couple of years, the climate change is going to become such a significant factor. It might lead into economic downfalls. as countries and individuals. And also it can also a downfall of quality livelihoods. I mean, if you're thinking about it, okay, if it is your environment is like what's really happening in California as we speak, if you can't step out, it's extremely warm. That's going to damage your livelihood, and also you can't grow anything. Your crops are going to get spoiled, and then suddenly you will have extreme weather where rainfalls can come in a very rapid way and can be very heavy falls. All these things are bound to happen in the next coming years, but I'm still questioning myself that have people still understood its impact? That's a question to answer and something to observe.
It's very clear that, Dishana, that a majority of the world's leaders are not coming from a science background. And as a result of that, a majority of them don't really understand the ramifications of what the scientists are saying about extreme weather incidents and the impact it will have on global economies. And it's very clear also that a majority of world leaders are trying to maximize their natural resources, their resources, especially in fossil fuels, as fast as they can, because they know the time is coming for them to give it up. But by extending the use of fossil fuels, they don't realize that what they're really doing is making a bad matter worse in terms of the climate emergency. So the big money they will earn from selling fossil fuels will probably go back into reconstructing damaged economies as opposed to giving them profit. So I think the gist of what I have said today is that world leaders need to be sensitive to the science and act accordingly. And exiting fossil fuels is no longer an option, it is an imperative.
Thank you very much for that um, input which you have been giving us in the last couple of episodes, Dr. I think this is, as you rightly said, sustainability is not an option, it's a business imperative. So with leads that to in next topic which we will be discussing, and I'm also looking forward for your thoughts on governance and disruptions and how to fight climate change in the governance perspective. So once again, Doctor, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciated your feedback and sharing your knowledge, which everyone will be benefit. And once again, I'll see you soon on the next episode, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Doctor.